Hey everybody, my name is Anderson Sunda. I'm the art teacher at Maurice Bowling Middle School here in Owen County, and I teach grades 5 through 8. And today I'm going to be doing a demonstration on how to make what I call a ceramic loom weaving project. And these look something kind of like this. If you can see that, yeah, okay. So here's a couple examples. And so what I like about this project is that it is here's another example, right? And what I like about this project is that it combines a couple of different media, right? It's a pottery project, right? It's a ceramics project, and it's also a weaving project, right? So we can start this project, 1 week, and we go through the ceramic process and everything like that, and then once that's done, then we can move on to a whole new section, a weaving section, but we're still working on that same project, so which I think is pretty cool. This project was developed by, or was inspired by, the circle weaving project that I learned from the great Miles Johnson when I was doing my student teaching. If you guys have ever seen these, where you just do like a circle, you make a loom on a paper plate, and you do a circle weaving. So I've been doing these with 5th grade since since I started teaching. I've been doing this project, and that's been one of my main 5th grade weaving projects. And so I think it was maybe last year, maybe the year before, I can't remember, when I was looking around on Pinterest and I saw somebody doing something very similar to the circle weaving project, but they were making their looms out of pottery, or out of clay, instead of on a paper plate. So I was like, well, that's kind of a cool idea. So I started doing this project with 7th grade because I do the circle weaving project with 5th grade. And so I figured, okay, so if they learn how to do the circle weaving project in 5th grade, then in 7th grade, our pottery project can be to make a circle loom like this, and then the weaving part's already familiar because they already have learned it. So it sort of just builds on that earlier project. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through this. It's really simple. It's not that complicated of a project. It just involves taking a piece of clay and rolling it out into a slab. And then just cutting a hole, cutting a big circle in the middle, and then poking out holes where you're going to do the loom later on. So yeah, it's pretty simple. So I'll walk you through these steps, I think they're really neat to look at, right? Like these kids always want, especially when it's pottery, kids want stuff that they can use, right? They want functional work, right? They want to make mugs or bowls or whatever. But I like this project just because it looks really cool, especially when you have a whole bunch on display all at once. We've got a couple of glass cases up in our cafeteria, and when I have all these on display all at once, they look really, really, really cool. This is one of those. This is the rare ceramic project that I do that's not functional. Usually when I do pottery, I try to do functional things like, pinch pots or bowls or mugs or, things that kids can use just because that's what kids like. Kids like to make something and then be able to use it. So this is one of the rare, ceramic projects that's really not functional. It just looks cool. Although I have had some kids say, well, you could set it down and use it as like a pot holder, right? So I guess technically you could use this as a pot holder. But anyway. But I'm going to attach some pictures. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to be, how this presentation is going to be presented at this virtual conference, but I'm going to attach some pictures of some additional pieces so that you can kind of see some of the other ones, what they look like. I thought I had a lot more pictures. I thought I had a picture of the glass case with all of them in there, but I couldn't find that picture. So you'll just have to trust me, but it looks really cool. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some clay, and I'm going to roll out a slab and show you how to carve this out, carve a big circle, poke the holes and all that. All right? Okay, so the very first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to roll out a slab, okay? Sometimes, depending on how much time I have, I may roll out a bunch of slabs before class, like beforehand, so that I have enough. Other times, if I have more time in class, then I'll just, we'll do the whole process together, and I'll just have kids come up, like one table at a time, and we'll roll out our slabs together. But either way, each kid's going to need a slab probably about this size. if you don't have a slab roller, then you can just use like a rolling pin. My first year teaching, or my first year at this school, we didn't have a slab roller, and so all our clay projects, I went and bought like a dozen cheap rolling pins, and that's how we did all our slab projects with clay. But then pretty quickly I went and asked for a slab roller, and I was fortunate enough they said yes. So you'll take a hunk of clay. I usually use a piece maybe, I don't know, bigger than my fist, not as big as 2 fists. You know, just kind of eyeball it. If you've worked with clay before, then you're probably good at kind of figuring out how much exactly you're going to need. But for a slab about this size, I'd say it's just a little bit bigger than your fist, maybe. And of course, the first thing I always do, some kids, and I always tell kids this, it has this canvas texture from the slab roller. If you like that texture, you can keep that texture. There's nothing wrong with that. I always like to smooth it out beforehand. So I got one of these little smoothing tools, and I just kind of, I go lightly over it to smooth out the surface. And I tell them, especially if you're going to carve into your clay, if you're going to carve designs, or if you're going to roll a pattern onto it with one of the pattern rollers, then you'll want to smooth it out because it's going to look better if it's smooth first. Okay, so I just go through, smooth that out quickly. Okay, and the next step, if you want to, or if you have the resources to, I have some texture rollers that kind of roll textures or designs onto clay. So I let kids, if they want to use those, they can use those. Let me go grab one real quick. All right, so I've got these texture rollers. I'm sure you've probably seen these in the catalogs and on the websites and stuff. I looked at them for years, and I finally, a year or two ago, I was like, you know what? These would be cool to have. Kids will like them. So I finally just splurged and spent the, however much they cost, 20, 50 bucks, I can't remember. But they are pretty cool. Kids really like them. And so this is what I tell kids. If you're gonna put a design on these, on your slab, if you're gonna roll a texture or something like that, you wanna do it at this point. You don't wanna wait until later, because if you carve out your loom beforehand, then when you roll the texture on, it's gonna smush your loom. So I'm gonna pick one of these designs. Let's say I'm gonna do the little koi fish. Those are pretty cool. So I'm just gonna go across, well, I'm gonna use this one instead. No. All right, so I'm gonna use this one. It's kind of like this floral pattern. And I'm just gonna, if you use one of these, you wanna press down pretty firm because you wanna make sure that design shows up. Okay, so there's my design. All right, if you're just gonna make yours smooth, that's fine. And then when you're ready, you're gonna take some sort of carving tool. I mean, I'm using this little metal stylus or carving tool or whatever. But with kids, especially with the younger kids, I use plastic silverware, right? So I'll get a box or two of plastic spoons and knives and forks, and I'll use the knives for the carving, right? And so when you go to carve this out, you can carve these into whatever kind of shape you want. So like I got some examples here. So like this one's kind of an oval, kind of a circular shape. Some kids will do just a basic square, which is fine. Some kids will just use the whole slab. Like some kids won't even carve anything out. They'll just leave it as is, and then they'll carve out the middle part and carve their holes, which is fine, but it does take a lot of space in the kiln, and it is really big. And the other thing you might want to keep in mind is the bigger these things are, the more fragile they are. And actually, I should mention that this is probably the most fragile ceramics project that I do. The first year I did this project, I did it with 5th grade, and I'd say probably at least a third, if not probably more, ended up breaking. And I had to scramble to make extras for kids whose pieces broke. I have discovered, and I'm sure those of you who do pottery already know this, but the best thing if one of these pieces breaks is to use 2-part epoxy. So that works pretty well. Here's an extreme case of one that this kid broke it, I fixed it, and then they broke it again, and I fixed it again. So you can see all these spaces where I had to go and reattach all these pieces. So these things can be fixed, but when you are rolling out your slabs, I tend to do them on the thicker side rather than on the thinner side. It takes more clay, but they are a little bit more sturdy. They're less breakable if they're a little bit thicker. So, and on that note, usually when I do this project, I'll make 10 or 20 extra. I'll just real quick, I'll roll out a few slabs, and I'll just real quick make an extra 10 or 20 of these just basic circle looms just to have, just in case kids break or they don't do it right or they mess up. Because of the ceramic process where it takes so much time, and especially in middle school, we just don't have that much time with our 9-week schedule. So if a kid's breaks, I have an extra one I can just grab and say, okay, use this one, which isn't as cool. It's not as original as the one they made, but at least they have one that they can weave on. So I'll glaze those like white or clear or whatever, and then I'll let them put their initials in glaze so that they know that one's theirs. So it's always a good idea to have a few extra just in case, because you are going to have kids that break theirs really easily. So anyway, so I've got my slab, I've got my design. So you can do, like I said, kids can do whatever sort of shape they want. Like some kids will just do a random blob. Like this is just this kid just went crazy all the way around. That's fine. You just want to make sure that whatever shape you cut out, you want to make sure you have enough space in the middle for that circle and those holes that you're going to have to poke out. So for this one, let's say I'm just going to do like a wavy line pattern like that. And then I'll just pull away the excess clay. And one thing I discovered, and again, I'm sure those of you who do pottery a lot already know this, but it's always a good idea where you have these kind of sharp edges, maybe run your thumb along it just to kind of soften those edges a little bit, just because when it fires, and once this is fired, it's going to be those edges will be sharp, and so it's always a good idea to kind of smooth those edges out a little bit, especially if you got these little pieces that are hanging on. So now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to let this dry just for a little bit, right? I mean, you don't want it to get quite leather hard. I would let it just sit out for a little while. So like in class, I'll have kids. I'll either have kids let it set out for if they get done earlier in class with this part, I'll let them set for maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes if we have time. If not, I'll let them set after class for a little while, and then I'll just check on them, and then I'll wrap them up. Which makes a lot more work for me, but it is kind of, as far as time goes, it's kind of delicate because you don't want it to get too dry, but you don't want it to get you don't want to start carving everything while it's too wet either, because then you can tear it up. Okay. And then especially if your clay is really, 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 really fresh, right? And this clay is really fresh. So what I might do, if we don't have as much time in class, I do have like 3 blow dryers that I'll have stationed around the room. And if we need to get something solidified, which, if it's time constraints or whatever, and we need to dry this out a little bit, then they can go over and they can spend a few minutes with the blow dryer, sort of drying this out just enough to where it's safe to do the rest of the carving. So I'm going to go get a blow dryer so I can dry this off just a little bit, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so I put this under the blow dryer just for 3 or 4 minutes. It's still pretty moist, but I mean, I think it's safe enough at this point that I can go ahead. I can pick it up and I'm not afraid of it breaking or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the middle part. So what I usually use is I'll make a couple of these just out of like some cardstock paper. I'll make like a little template so that kids can kind of hold this over their piece, and then they can kind of mark where these holes need to be, because you do have to have a specific number of holes. It has to be an odd number for this to work. Usually I think this one I have like either 9 or 13. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, this one has 11, but usually I'll do anywhere, 9, 11, 13, somewhere in that area. But it does need to be an odd number And so in order for kids to make sure they have that odd number, I'll have them put this, this template over top, and they'll just mark where these holes need to be so that they know that's where they need to poke a hole. Okay, so now, now that I know where the holes are, I guess I shouldn't have taken that off, but anyway. So now what I'll do is I'll just use this template to cut out the middle circle where my weaving's going to be. Okay. And then what you want to do is you're going to use, uh-oh, I lost a hole here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to poke some holes. All right. So when you go to poke these holes, they don't have to be in the exact spot where I made the mark. So like for instance, this mark is really close to the edge, so I'm probably going to move that to like maybe here, something like that. This one's really close to the edge, so I might move it to here. And so I'll go through and I'll kind of just redo these marks. And to poke these holes, usually I'll use a colored pencil. I'm sure if you're like me, you've got a ton of just old colored pencils lying around. So usually I'll just use an old colored pencil, and you just want to be real easy, and you want to poke. I usually try and poke upward away from the middle so that you know, because you don't want it to tear between the hole and the circle in the middle. And then as it goes through the back, I tend to kind of just press that, you know, press that excess clay down into the back of the loom. But the main thing with these holes is you want to make sure they're big and clear and there's nothing in them. And you want to make sure there's no clay that's kind of stopping them up. This is a really fun thing to say to 7th graders, talking about how you know, your holes need to be clear, your holes need to not have anything stuck in them. So that's a fun thing to say to 7th graders, but it is important, because if they are not big enough, then when you go to string up your loom, you won't be able to get the yarn through, right? So it is really important that these holes are at least as big around as a pencil, so that you have plenty of room to get a piece of yarn through that hole, and so that when you glaze later on, that you don't get any glaze stuck down in that hole, because if that happens, then if there's some clay stuck in there and it fires, you can usually clear it out, you know, with a carving tool or something. But if there's glaze that gets stuck down in there, there's really nothing you can do if one of these holes is stopped up with glaze. So, let's see. All right, so now all my holes look good here. So this is pretty much, as far as the building process, this is pretty much finished. Okay, so all I really need to do now is to fire it and glaze it, and then do the glaze firing. Or, you know, if you are somebody who does the glaze and then wait for it to dry, apply the glaze, and then just do one firing. I always do 2 firings just because I don't know. That's just the way I've always done it. But you know, you can let this get bone dry and then carefully apply the glaze and then just do 1 firing. I just prefer to do a bisque firing and then a glaze firing. But yeah, that's pretty much this part of it. That's pretty much the clay part, the ceramic part. Okay, and so once this is fired and glazed, you know, it'll, like I said, it'll end up looking something kind of like this. Again, here's some more examples. This one's a really good example where they made sure the holes are all nice and clear and unobstructed by clay or glaze. They're nice and round. You know, I have some examples where the holes are not done as well. So for instance, all these holes are clear, but there's one here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's very small. It's very difficult to get a piece of yarn through. You usually have to take like a toothpick or something tiny to sort of poke that string through so that you can string up your loom. So it is important to make sure that all your holes are clear so that you can get your string through all these holes. So next step, once this is fired and glazed and it's done and it comes out, obviously it'll look something kind of like this. You know, I've got some other examples over there of these finished looms.
that don't have string on them yet, but this is basically this is the finished product of the ceramic portion. The next step is going to be stringing up the loom and then doing your circle weaving. And the weaving itself is really easy because you're just going over and under in a circle, but it is a little bit complex on how to string these up. Okay, and I think I'm probably actually going to use a paper plate rather than one of these to show you, just because I think it'll be a little bit clearer than doing it on one of these. But I do have a bunch of finished products that you'll be able to see once I'm done. All right, so I made this little kind of template to show you how to string this up. Because I just think it'll be a little bit easier than trying to do it on one of these looms, because sometimes the yarn, it gets stuck to the inside the hole with the clay, and it unravels, and it can take a while. So I'm just going to show you on this little styrofoam template I made out of a paper plate, or styrofoam plate. And the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start with a piece of yarn that I usually do about 3 arm lengths. So I'll be like, so I'll measure it out. I'll pull yarn until my arm's stretched out, pull another arm stretched out, pull another arm stretched out, and that's usually what I start with, just to make sure that I have enough. All right. And so what I usually have kids do is just pick any one of these holes, and you're going to tie your string sort of to the inside of this hole. Okay, so something like that, right? And you'd be surprised the number of 7th graders who still need help tying a knot. Yeah, so it looks like that. So you have a string, looks like that, right? And usually I'll have scissors out. Kids can cut off these little extra pieces if they need to, so they're not in the way. So anyway, so now what you're going to do is you're going to take that string and you're going to take it to the hole that is more or less straight across from the hole that you just tied it to. And you're going to go through the front of your loom. So you're going to pull it through the front of your loom. Like that. Okay? And then what you're going to do, this is where things get a little confusing. It's not that complicated, but kids do have a lot of trouble with it sometimes. Some kids have trouble understanding this next step. So once you have it through that hole directly across, you're going to take your string and you're going to go over to the next hole over, and you're going to bring it back through like that. So you're going to bring it back through the front. Like that. And so on the back, it's going to go through this hole, it's going to come over and go through the front like that. And then you're going to take it across so that it crisscrosses, and you're going to go to the hole that's across from that one so that it's going to crisscross. And so you're going to go through that next hole like that. So that it looks like that. Okay? And then you're just going to repeat that process. You're just going to go over to this next hole and bring it through the front. And again, so it's a repetitive process, and it's really not that complicated. But kids do get confused with this really easily, and so you will spend a lot of time running around showing kids. A lot of times, what I've started doing in the last couple of years is I've started a couple of days in advance, if I get a few moments, identifying those kids who are good helpers and who are going to pick this up pretty quick, getting two or three of those kids, showing them how to do it, making sure they know how to do it, and then while the rest of your class is doing this, you can have them walk around and sort of help the kids that are having trouble, and I found that really, really, really helpful. Keeps me from having to run around to every student trying to show them how to do it again. But so yeah, you're just repeating that process, crisscross. So you're going to go across and then over to the next hole, and then across and over to the next hole. And if you've ever done the circle weaving project, like on the paper plate, this is very similar, except instead of holes in the plate, you kind of cut notches in the edge of the plate. But it's still basically it's the same thing. Now, sometimes depending on the number of holes that you have, like I think I did either 11 or 13, you may end up coming through and still having one hole left over on the other side. Ideally, you would have one hole left over here and not one over here, but sometimes that just happens with the number of holes that you end up with. So if that happens, so I've gone through this hole, and then the last empty hole is over here on the opposite side. I just bring it around the back and bring it through the front that way. Like that. And it doesn't look the best, but I mean it works. But you know, sometimes that'll happen. I just tell kids if they have this extra string in the back, then when they go to actually start weaving in a circle, they're going to use these strings. They're just not going to use this string in the back, if that makes sense. So, so they'll have this extra string back here, but they're not going to weave on that string. So now, once I have my strings all strung up like this, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this loose string, and this is the part that gets everybody confused. I'm going to use this loose string, and I'm going to wrap it around the middle where all these other strings are crisscrossing. Okay, so I'm going to take this string and I'm going to loop it under. This is where kids get confused. I'm going to loop it underneath so that it wraps around all those other strings. And when it wraps around all those other strings, it brings all those strings tight up together. Does that make sense? So I wrapped it around, and I'll usually do that maybe 2 or 3 more times just to make sure that it's nice and tight. Like that. And so now this is nice and tight. And so now, I still have quite a bit of string left over, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut this a little bit. So now we're ready to start weaving, right? Now we're down to the easy part. And the easy part is you just start going. It doesn't matter where you start, but you're just going to take this middle string and you're going to go under and over and under and over, under and over. If you've ever done a weaving project, that should be familiar. And at first, the middle's just going to look like a big lump of string, but as you keep going, it'll start taking on a circular shape as it goes out. And then once you get to a point where you don't have any string left, this is when I have kids, they go up to the yarn box, get them an arm length or 2 of a color they want, they tie it onto this end, and then they just keep going until they run out of space. And kids are always like, well, how far out do I need to keep weaving? Well, until you can't weave any farther. You want to fill up this space as much as possible, okay? So, just over and under and over and under in a circle. Like so. And you can see it's already starting to take on that sort of circular shape. And again, notice this extra string back here, I'm not weaving on that. It's kind of there. But once I'm done weaving, you won't be able to see it, so it doesn't really matter. And you're just going to keep going like that in a circle. Like I said, when you run out, get you a new piece of string, tie it on, and then just keep going. Yeah, and so that's basically what it looks like. And so once these are done, they end up looking like this. I'll show you how to tie off the end once you run out of space. I'll use this example. I'll show you how I usually just show, or well, I guess you can kind of see it. Once you get to an end point and you don't want to weave anymore, you can see there's a little knot here. I just have kids tie their yarn, their end piece, to one of these loom pieces right here, and then they just cut the little end off, and that's what it looks like. So that's kind of what these look like. Let me show you a few more examples of different ones. So here's some different looms. Some of these are finished. Some of these are ones that just got put in the storage room and never got finished. But you know, these look really cool. They can be really individualized with the, you know, the different colors and the different glazes and the different shapes. You know, they all look similar, but they all look really, really different at the same time. And that's something I think is really, really cool. Like this one, you know, they put a little bow on it, which is pretty cool. I do tell kids it's really important. You can see on this one, you can see they carved their initials. I always have kids carve their initials somewhere on their piece so that we know whose is whose. Because even though everybody's looks, you know, different, you'll always have several that look very, very similar. Especially, you know, since we're using the same glazes and the same patterns and things like that. So, so that's kind of what these look like. I think they look really neat. And I think they're, I just think they're really, really nice looking, like on display, and kids really, really like them because they get to do pottery, they get to do weaving, and yeah, so it's a really fun project. It's pretty simple. It's time consuming because you have to do a pottery project, and then on top of that, you have to do a weaving project. So it does take a couple of weeks, you know, to get it all completely finished. But yeah, it's a fun project. Kids love it. I do it with 7th grade, but I think you could easily do it with 6th grade, 8th grade. I do definitely think it's more of a kind of a middle school project, because you know, we get into high school and it's probably really not advanced enough for high school, and it's probably a little bit too advanced for elementary school, which I found out when I tried to do this with 5th grade, and it was, you know, it just wasn't. I mean, it was successful, but there was a lot of problems we ran into just because they're so fragile. So, so I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found this interesting. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll include my email on this presentation somewhere so you can see it. So if you have any questions about this project, you can send those to me. But yeah, hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, see you all later.